Ellen Harper stood in the dim glow of the conference room, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, as the chandeliers above cast golden flecks across the polished mahogany table. The air smelled of expensive perfume and aged whiskey, a scent that clung to the tailored suits and silk dresses of the guests gathered for Harper and Dunn's 30th anniversary gala. The company she had co-founded with her partner, Richard Dunn, was being celebrated tonight, its name synonymous with financial consulting excellence in Chicago's cutthroat business world. Ellen, now 62, her auburn hair streaked with silver and pulled into a neat chignon, wore a navy blazer that felt more like armor than fashion. She had always been the quieter half of the partnership, the one who balanced ledgers while Richard charmed clients with his easy smile. Tonight, though, her chest tightened with an unease she couldn't name, a shadow that flickered beneath the clinking glasses and murmured praise. The room buzzed with the energy of success. Young associates mingled with gray-haired investors, their laughter rising over the soft jazz drifting from the quartet in the corner. Ellen's daughter, Clara, stood near the stage, her chestnut curls catching the light as she adjusted the microphone. At 28, Clara was a rising star in the firm, her role as marketing director a point of pride for Ellen, who had spent years nurturing her daughter's ambition. Clara's navy dress hugged her frame, a mirror of Ellen's own understated elegance, but her confidence was all her own. Ellen watched her daughter with a quiet swell of love, remembering the nights she'd spent helping Clara with math homework, the mornings driving her to debate tournaments. Clara had been her anchor after Ellen's husband left when Clara was just a toddler, leaving Ellen to build a life from the ashes of that betrayal. The gala was a milestone, a testament to 3 decades of Ellen's meticulous work. She had been the one to catch errors in tax filings, to negotiate with auditors, to ensure the firm's books were flawless. Richard had been the face, charismatic, bold, always ready with a handshake or a story. Together, they had turned a small accounting office into a powerhouse, advising Fortune 500 companies and securing their place in Chicago's elite. Yet tonight, as Ellen stood among the crowd, she felt like a guest in her own story, her contributions buried beneath Richard's spotlight. She scanned the room, her eyes lingering on the framed photos lining the walls, Richard shaking hands with CEOs, Richard cutting ribbons at charity events, Richard accepting awards. Her name was on the letterhead, but her face was nowhere to be found. Clara stepped to the podium, her smile radiant as she began her speech. The room quieted, all eyes on her. Ellen's heart lifted, expecting a nod to the partnership, to the mother who had paved her way. Clara spoke of the firm's legacy, its growth, its impact. She praised Richard's vision, his tireless pursuit of excellence. Then her voice softened, her eyes finding a woman in the front row. Ellen followed her gaze to a figure in a crimson dress, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, her posture poised yet intimate, as if she belonged at the heart of this moment. Clara's words carried a weight Ellen hadn't anticipated. She thanked this woman, Vanessa Reed, for being the soul of the firm, the one who had stood by Richard through every challenge, who had made the company a family. The room erupted in applause, but Ellen's ears rang with a deafening silence. Vanessa Reed, Richard's executive assistant for the past 15 years. Ellen knew her, of course, her sharp efficiency, her knack for anticipating Richard's needs. But family? The word sliced through Ellen like a paper cut, small but stinging. She stood frozen, her hands still clasped, as the crowd's attention shifted to Vanessa. Whispers rippled through the room, curious and approving. Ellen's mind raced back to the early days, when Vanessa had been a young hire, her resume impeccable but her presence unassuming. Over the years, she had risen to a senior role, always at Richard's side during late-night strategy sessions or client dinners. Ellen skipped to care for Clara. Ellen had never questioned it. Richard had always said Vanessa was indispensable, and Ellen, buried in spreadsheets, had trusted him. Now, as Clara's words hung in the air, Ellen felt the ground shift beneath her. She was the co-founder, the one who had sacrificed weekends, sleep, and dreams to build this empire. Yet her daughter, her own flesh and blood, had just crowned another woman the heart of it all. The gala continued, but Ellen moved through it like a ghost. Guests offered congratulations, their words blurring into a hum. She nodded, her smile automatic, her mind replaying Clara's speech. When the night ended, she drove home alone, the city's lights streaking past her like stars she couldn't reach. Her apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park, felt emptier than usual. Clara had moved out years ago, and the silence was a constant companion. Ellen sat at her dining table, the same one where she'd once reviewed contracts by lamplight, and stared at the grain of the wood. A memory surfaced, Clara, at 16, asking why Ellen worked so hard. Because this firm is ours, Ellen had said. Yours and mine. Clara had nodded then, her eyes bright with understanding. Or so Ellen had thought. Sleep eluded her that night. She opened her laptop, the blue glow casting shadows across the room. On a whim, she searched Vanessa's name online. Her LinkedIn profile was polished, listing her as a senior consultant at Harper & Dunn. But it was her personal website that caught Ellen's attention, a sleek page showcasing her philanthropy work, photos of her at firm events, always near Richard. One image stopped Ellen cold, Vanessa and Richard at a charity auction, his hand resting lightly on her back, their smiles conspiratorial. The caption read, "Grateful for my partner in all things." Partner. The word burned. The next morning, Ellen drove to the office, a glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan. The firm was quiet, the gala's energy replaced by the hum of routine. She bypassed her corner office and headed to the archives, a basement room filled with dusty file cabinets. She hadn't been here in years, her role now more ceremonial than operational. But something gnawed at her, a need to understand. She pulled ledgers from a decade ago, her fingers tracing columns she'd once memorized. The numbers told a story she hadn't seen before: irregular transfers to a company called Blue Horizon LLC, payments labeled as consulting fees but lacking invoices. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, siphoned over years, always just below the audit threshold. Ellen's pulse quickened. She cross-referenced the dates. Many coincided with times she'd been distracted: Clara's college applications, her mother's illness, the firm's expansion. Richard had handled those accounts, assuring her everything was in order. She trusted him, not just as a partner but as the closest thing to family after her husband's abandonment. Now, doubt crept in like damp rot. She searched Blue Horizon LLC online. A shell company, no physical address, registered in Delaware. The beneficiary's name was obscured, but Ellen's instincts, honed by years of untangling financial webs, told her it was Vanessa. She spent days in the archives, her blazer replaced by a cardigan, her hair loose and untamed. She found more: property deeds tied to Blue Horizon, a condo in Gold Coast, a lake house in Wisconsin. The firm's money had funded a life Ellen hadn't known existed. Her hands shook as she photographed each document, her phone's camera flash illuminating the dim room. She thought of Clara's words at the gala, the way Vanessa had stood, accepting the praise as if it were her birthright. Ellen's sacrifices, nights spent reconciling accounts, weekends missed with Clara had built this empire, only for it to be stolen. The betrayal deepened when she found an email from Richard to Vanessa, buried in an old server backup. "You're my haven," he wrote. "Clara understands. She's one of us." Ellen's breath caught. Clara knew? Her daughter, the one she'd raised alone, had been complicit? The realization was a slow bleed, more painful than Richard's deception. She remembered Clara's teenage years, how she'd idolized Richard, calling him Uncle Rick. Ellen had thought it sweet, a bond to fill the void of her absent father. Now, it felt like a conspiracy. Ellen confronted Clara at her apartment, a sleek loft downtown. Clara's face, so like Ellen's but younger, hardened when Ellen mentioned Vanessa. Clara admitted she'd known about the relationship for years. Richard had confided in her during college, swearing her to secrecy. "He was happy with her, Mom," Clara said, her voice steady. "You were always so focused on the numbers. He needed more." Ellen felt the words like a slap. She had been the backbone, the one who made Richard's charisma possible, yet she was the one cast aside. Clara's loyalty to Richard, to Vanessa, was a betrayal sharper than any ledger's discrepancy. Ellen left, her heart a tangle of grief and resolve. She hired a lawyer, Margaret Cole, a woman with a reputation for dismantling corporate fraud. Margaret's office was stark, all glass and steel, a contrast to the chaos of Ellen's emotions. She handed over the documents, the photos, the email. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she reviewed them. This wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was embezzlement, a violation of fiduciary duty. Ellen felt a flicker of power, the kind she'd once wielded in boardrooms before stepping back for Clara's sake. The lawsuit was filed quietly, but it rippled through the firm like a shockwave. Richard's death 6 months later in a skiing accident only complicated things. His will, read in a sterile law office, left his shares of Harper & Dunn to Vanessa, not Ellen or Clara. The firm, Ellen's life's work, was slipping from her grasp. Clara, now openly aligned with Vanessa, called it Richard's wish. Ellen saw it for what it was, a final act of erasure. The court case stretched over months, a grueling parade of depositions and financial audits. Ellen sat through each hearing, her navy blazer a constant, her face composed but her hands trembling in her lap. Vanessa's lawyers painted her as a loyal employee, the payments as legitimate bonuses. But Margaret was relentless, presenting the shell company's records, the email, the property deeds. Ellen took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted 30 years of building the firm, of sacrifices unseen. She spoke of Clara, of the nights she'd stayed up to ensure her daughter's future, only to be betrayed by her too. The judge, a woman with gray curls and sharp eyes, seemed to see Ellen, truly see her, for the first time. The ruling came on a crisp autumn morning. The court ordered Vanessa to repay $2.3 million, the sum of the illicit transfers, plus interest. The condo and lake house were sold to cover it. Vanessa's reputation crumbled, her role at the firm terminated. The shares reverted to Ellen, restoring her control. But the victory was bittersweet. Clara refused to speak to her, her silence a wound that bled anew each day. Ellen moved through the firm's offices, now hers alone, feeling the weight of her triumph and her loss. She saw Clara's empty desk, the marketing campaigns she'd designed, and wondered if she'd ever regain her daughter. Years passed. Ellen transformed Harper & Dunn, redirecting its profits to a non-profit she founded, Empower Ledger, to mentor women in finance. She spoke at conferences, her silver-streaked hair a badge of resilience, her story inspiring others. She bought a small house in Evanston, its garden filled with lavender she tended herself. The act of planting, of coaxing life from soil, felt like a reclaiming of her own roots. One spring, Clara called. Richard's death anniversary had stirred something in her. They met at a cafe, the same one where Ellen had once bought Clara hot chocolate after school. Clara's face was softer now, her eyes carrying a weight Ellen recognized regret. She admitted she'd been wrong, blinded by Richard's charm, by Vanessa's promises. She'd believed Ellen's strength made her invincible, not realizing it had been a shield for her pain. Ellen listened, her heart aching but open. They began to rebuild, slowly, over coffee dates and walks along the lakefront. Clara joined Empower Ledger, her marketing skills breathing life into the nonprofit. One evening, Ellen stood in her garden, the lavender fragrant under a fading sky. She thought of the gala, of Vanessa's crimson dress, of Clara's misplaced loyalty. She thought of the ledgers, the courtroom, the years she'd been unseen. But she also thought of the women she'd mentored, the daughter she'd regained, the life she'd reclaimed. The sunset painted the horizon gold, and Ellen felt, for the first time in decades, that she was no longer a silent partner. She was Ellen Harper, the author of her own story, and it was enough.